Well, Merry Christmas, everybody. Welcome to the stories of Christmas and winter lore. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about some things that you probably do in your family or in your house, you did as a child, that are actually not what you think they are, or you don't know where they came from, and they mean a lot more than you think. So in the next 45 minutes or so, I will be shifting between, you'll be able to see me all the time, but I'll get smaller and I'm going to show you some screens with some pictures to kind of help tell you about Christmas. I'm going to start with talking about Christmas trees. Christmas trees started as a tradition with people and human beings way back in almost primitive times, certainly long before Christ was born. Probably we can go a good 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, when people lived off the earth. They grew all their food, and winter would come. And when winter came and the snow fell, and the sun wouldn't be up for very long, people would not have fresh food. They couldn't go and get it. They could only eat the food they'd stored. So during the winter, they became afraid, and the sun was gone, and it was cold. And they really wanted the sun to come back and to remind them of what will be, of spring and the sun coming back in light. They had a celebration. It was one in which they went out and got a tree and put in their house. And they always put an evergreen tree in, because evergreen trees are green during the winter. So the people would bring the evergreen trees into their house and they would decorate it. And in their decorating of the Christmas tree, let's see if I can make that switch. There we go. They would decorate it with cookies and things that they made and food. And they also would put apples on the Christmas tree. And why would they put apples on a Christmas tree? Well, if you decorated with fruit, what fruit is ripe in December? What fruit is ripe at the beginning of winter? Well, it's apples. And so they would decorate their tree in part with apples. But something you may not know is that today we put red bulbs on our Christmas tree. And those red bulbs, now made out of glass or plastic, those are actually apples. So when you decorate your Christmas tree with red bulbs, you are doing the same thing that they did thousands of years ago to decorate their Christmas tree, only they used apples. Something else to know about Christmas trees is that one of the reasons that they brought trees in was the story of Adam and Eve. And ostensibly in the Garden of Eden, Eve was tempted by the serpent in a tree to eat the fruit of the tree. That was an apple tree. And of course she ate the fruit, and lots of things came from that. But there was a feast of Eden very often, early on, thousands and thousands of years ago. And that feast, they brought a tree into the house and decorated it with apples, much like they did the Christmas tree a little bit earlier. So the Christmas tree with its red ornaments on it, very much reminiscent of a long, long time ago. Now, you're wondering, why do we today bring a Christmas tree in and decorate it? Well, you know, we kind of stopped doing that for a while when we became a civilization and there were cities and things like that, until Queen Charlotte, who was in the 17th century. Queen Charlotte decided that she wanted to bring a tree into the palace. Now, they hadn't done it before. I mean, nobody had really had Christmas trees for hundreds and hundreds of years. It just stopped. Queen Charlotte brought in a Christmas tree and decorated it, put candles on it and ornaments and glass and holly. And she did this and took a photograph, which photographs had just started. And the big newspaper of the time printed the photograph of Queen Charlotte's tree, which she did at Christmas time, so they called it a Christmas tree. And people all over the world thought, oh, that's cool. I want to be like Queen Charlotte. So the rich people began bringing evergreen trees into the house and decorating them, and then everybody else did. So one of the reasons that we bring Christmas trees into our house is because of Queen Charlotte, which is pretty darn sweet. Now, I want to go back for a second here and talk about somebody. Here we are. You've heard of St. Nicholas, I'm sure. He was a bishop in Turkey in the 4th century. But there's some things you don't know about Nicholas I'd like to tell you about. First of all, they called St. Nicholas Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas was the Dutch name. And of course, later on when people said Santa Claus, they changed the sound of it just because of when they said it, it sounded like Santa Claus, Santa Claus. And that's why Santa Claus has the name Sinterklaas, which comes from St. Nicholas, the bishop. Now, what about St. Nicholas, the bishop? Well, there is a story that St. Nicholas, who is now considered the patron saint of children, you probably didn't know that, St. Nicholas heard that 3 boys had gone into a restaurant. Now, St. Nicholas rode around on his donkey in Turkey, and he heard that 3 boys had gone into a restaurant and ordered food and eaten it. And when they were done, they told the owner of the restaurant that they didn't have any money to pay for their dinner. Oh, that's really bad. So what the owner of the restaurant did is he chopped the boys up and put them in a stew. Oh, that sounds terrible. Totally, it's awful. Nobody should do that. Oh, that's terrible. But St. Nicholas heard about this, and he went to the restaurant, and he saw this cauldron with stuff cooking in it. And he realized, oh my gosh, this is true. Those boys were chopped up and put in a stew. So St. Nicholas, Bishop Nicholas, talked to the owner, and he said, I understand that you have 3 boys who did not pay, and you put them in this stew. He said, if you will let me check in this stew for a piece of one of those children, and if that is good, then I will bring them back to life. Would that be okay? And the owner thought about it, but it was St. Nicholas. So he said, okay. So St. Nicholas checked around in the stew with pieces in it, and he pulled out a piece, and he showed it to the man, and he said, this piece does look pretty good. And the owner said, well, yes, it is good. And St. Nicholas said, you know what? I'm going to bring all these 3 boys back. And he did. But it was a trick with the owner, because no matter what child is good or bad or anything else, there was always, in every child, there is some good. And St. Nicholas knew that in that stew, there was some good in those children. So it was really a trick on the owner. Well, anyways, St. Nicholas did that. At least that's what the story is. And I want you to look at these old paintings and pictures that depict St. Nicholas. And what I think I want you to notice is down here, there are 3 little boys in a cauldron. See right there? And that is a fairly ancient stained glass, I believe from Italy. And over here is St. Nicholas, a statue of St. Nicholas. And look what's down here. 3 little boys. And that comes from the story of St. Nicholas saving the boys. And here we have St. Nicholas watching into the window, because there's another story about these 3 girls that you see here. And they were unmarried. And then at that time in Turkey, women should be married, and they married very, very young. But here were these 3 women sort of called old maids because they weren't married. Well, how horrible is that? And he was looking through the window because he heard them talking and crying, and he didn't know what was wrong. And what he heard was these girls weeping because no one wanted to marry them. And you know why they weren't married? They weren't married because their father did not have a dowry. And this is a picture of the father here. He didn't have any money to give whoever married his daughters. And so they were unmarried. Well, at night, people took off their shoes and their boots and put them by the fire. And When they were asleep that night, the bishop came back, and you see him here, St. Nicholas, holding money. And he put that money in the boots of each of these women. And it was enough money for them to have a dowry and get married. And that's why this painting here is of 3 maids and St. Nicholas up here giving money. And so because of his saving the children, St. Nicholas is known as the patron saint of children. But St. Nicholas is also known as the patron saint of unwed mothers. And that's these 3 women. So I wanted to show you that these stories have been around a long time. And of course, St. Nicholas becomes Santa Claus. Well, actually, Sinterklaas. Now, let's talk a little bit about Santa Claus and where Santa Claus came from, because it's a big story. I mean, you think, oh, well, it was a bishop, but where did this sleigh come from, and the reindeer, and how he looks, and everything else? A long, long time ago, there was a story written called A Visit from St. Nicholas. And of course, that would be the bishop. And when this story was written, it was actually, there's a lot of questions about who wrote this story, and I'm not going to get into that. But the story began, A Visit from St. Nicholas, and later it was changed to 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which you have heard or even read. Someone has read to you, 'Twas a night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. And that is the story of Christmas, but I want to tell you where all this came from, because it's really, I think it's going to surprise you a lot. Let's go here. Let's go back there. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit. Back in the olden days, back when they brought trees into the house and into their cabins or their little huts, and when winter, on December 21st, the winter solstice, the sun was out less and it got darker and darker and things wouldn't grow. Well, people worshipped a god called Odin, O-D-I-N, Odin, very powerful god. And he was very, very important to people in the early centuries. And Odin was said to go across the sky in his chariot carrying the sun. Earlier, people didn't have a god like Odin. They worshiped the sun itself. And the sun, the day they worshiped, was called Saturnalia. And Saturnalia, a celebration of the sun god, took place on December 21st, the winter solstice, the shortest night of the year, when winter was at its darkest and coldest. And they believed then that the sun god went away during the winter. And later, when they worshiped Odin, the sun god, he would go across the sky in a chariot. And the chariot would help him carry the sun. And it was Odin who carried the sun high in the sky during the summer. And then Odin took the sun away. And it got cold. And it was hard to live. So their celebration of Odin was sort of, it was like prayer, a festival, calling out to the sun god and then to Odin to bring back the sun. Well, later on, Odin, the story of Odin, changed from a chariot to Odin went across the sky. And here you're seeing an old print of Odin. And this is Odin. You can see his face up here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. But here's Odin. And Odin is riding a horse. And the horse is called Sleipnir. Sleipnir was the name of his horse. And he rode it across the sky, once again, carrying the sun away from the people into a darker time. And so people tried to celebrate Odin on his horse now, Sleipnir. But I want you to see something about this old print of Sleipnir. Count the legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sleipnir had 8 legs. What does that remind you of? So we have Odin, traveling across the sky, carrying the sun on Sleipnor, a horse with 8 legs. Well, so there it is. Here, now, we have Santa in his sleigh. Remember Sleipnor? That's where the sleigh came from, Sleipnor. And we don't have a horse with 8 legs now. We have a sleigh with 8 reindeer. That's why there are 8 reindeer. Oh, I know. Don't ask about Rudolph. But anyways, there is Santa, Saint Nicholas, which came from Sinterklaas, who we originally worshipped Odin, the sun god, who carried the sun in on his horse Sleipnor with 8 legs. And now we have Sinterklaas, Santa Claus. So Santa Claus goes way, way, way back in our time. I want to tell you a few more things about Christmas that you may not know, just while we're here. It was when this story came out, A Visit from St. Nicholas, and of course, after that, it was changed to a night before Christmas. It was the night before Christmas. It was the first time that Santa Claus was described. Santa Claus was celebrated as Sinterklaas, but nobody ever really thought of Santa Claus as Santa Claus, and they didn't know what he looked like. And in this, Santa Claus he was kind of heavy, he was kind of round and roly-poly. He wore a red suit with white, and he smoked a pipe. You didn't know that. And he came down the chimney, which I'll explain why he did that. But the first picture we had of Santa Claus was sort of the way he came out of this book. And later on, Coca-Cola, which you know is Coca-Cola, they sold soda pop, a Coke. And this is back in the 20s and 30s when the night before Christmas, 'twas the night before it first came out, and an advertising firm, people that, put ads on in the newspapers, they wanted to help Coca-Cola sell more soda pop in the winter because people drank it a lot during the summer when it was warm. But when winter came and it was cold, people didn't drink Coca-Cola. So the advertising agency who they hired came up with this. They painted a picture of Santa Claus. Santa Claus big and round and wearing a red suit with white trim with a big fluffy beard and a red and white hat. Well, they painted this picture of Santa Claus with a Coca-Cola. And what they wanted was people to associate Coca-Cola with Christmas in the winter. And guess what? It really worked well. But it did something else. It made everybody think of Santa Claus as kind of a big, fat, jolly man with red cheeks. See the red cheeks on this painting? And red nose, and his red hat with the white on it. And see the jingle bells? There were never jingle bells on Santa in 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. But Coca-Cola put that on him. And that's why we have jingle bells with Santa. A few other things I want to tell you about Christmas, just so we're all on the same wavelength here. We use holly a lot. And holly, I'm going to say this in a way that not everyone will understand this, but holly was from an ancient time back when the Christmas trees were evergreens brought in, and we didn't have glass and red bulbs and lights and all that stuff. It was really thousands and thousands of years ago. But during winter, besides apples being red, they also brought in holly with holly berries, because the holly berries are red during winter. And holly berries also have kind of they have a lot of green leaves, and they don't grow on a tree. They grow really more like a bush. They're very bushy. Well, later on, people referred to mistletoe, to the bushes with the red, very red berries. They referred to them as the burning bush. Remember the burning bush from the Bible? where Moses saw a burning bush and took off his sandals, and the burning bush talked to him. It was God. And anyways, a holly tree with its red berries looks like it's almost on fire. So later on, bringing mistletoe into the house and decorating at Christmas time was a reminder of the burning bush. It was also, though, more importantly, had something to do with fertility, which is having children. And during winter, people thought a lot about surviving and about their animals, making more animals, more chickens, more pigs, and all of those things. Well, so fertility was important. And holly berries were associated with menses, which has a lot to do with fertility. And oddly enough, another piece, where is it? Sorry. Okay, where is this thing? There it is. So there's a lot of oak trees around where we live in Silverton. And if you look up in the oak trees in the winter, when all the leaves have fallen, you will see things like this. These are pods of mistletoe. And mistletoe is a little bit like a mushroom. It just grows off the tree, and everything that makes it green comes from the tree. But something that a lot of people don't know about mistletoe is that it has little white berries. And the white berries are poisonous. Well, mistletoe was brought in for a lot of reasons. And I'll tell you one of the final reasons in a moment. But I think it's really important for you to know something about mistletoe. Back in the first centuries, when people were hurt or injured when they were tending their farm and doing work, chopping down trees, they would get hurt and cut themselves. Well, the berries of mistletoe were crushed up, and a poultice was made, which is sort of like a creamy thing. And they would take those crushed berries and they would put them on the wound, on the cut or the gash, for medicine, because they didn't have Band-Aids and they didn't have medicine. But they would put the berries made into a poultice on the wound. So mistletoe was a healing kind of plant. It was a healing plant. Well, later on, when there were wars and people fought each other in the wars, many of the soldiers carried mistletoe berries or mistletoe inside of their uniforms or their whatever they were wearing. Just in case they were hurt, they would have mistletoe berries to be crushed onto their wounds. And there were people later on who all they did was help people who were hurt, and they carried sacks of mistletoe. Well, now people associated, when they see mistletoe, they think of what? They think of healing. Well, when they had wars, here's what they began to do. When the two opposing chiefs or armies or generals came together and the war was going to be over and they were going to shake hands and make a truce, stop fighting, they would do that ceremony under an oak tree that had mistletoe. And why? Because the mistletoe represented the healing between these fighting people. Well, later on, when cathedrals were built, like Notre Dame is a good example in Paris. Well, when they had these things, when the soldiers and the leaders of countries that were fighting came together and they signed the truce and peace was established, they didn't do it under the oak trees anymore. They held those ceremonies in cathedrals like Notre Dame, which is huge and beautiful. But you know what they would do when they had those ceremonies? They would bring in armloads of mistletoe and they would put them above the altar, the sanctuary in Notre Dame. And if you go, you'll see there are big beams up above the altar. They would load those beams with mistletoe with the white berries. Why? Because people associated mistletoe and the berries with healing. And so they continued when they signed treaties and they came together. They continued to bring mistletoe in to represent that healing. Now you think we'd be all done, but oh no. Because today we hang mistletoe on a doorway, and if you stand under the doorway with someone under the mistletoe, you're supposed to kiss. Well, why do we do that? Well, what else happens in cathedrals and churches besides big ceremonies, weddings. And when brides and grooms got married in the cathedral, they would try to do it in the winter when they were under the mistletoe that was up there. And then they started bringing the mistletoe in just whenever they were married, because people got used to seeing mistletoe with the weddings. So there'd be mistletoe up above the altar. But here's the thing. The bishop hated mistletoe because mistletoe dries and then it falls apart and it makes a mess on the altar and the whole sanctuary. But they did that for when brides, when couples got married in the cathedral. Well, so the bishop said, no more mistletoe in the cathedral. Nope, not having it. But the brides were very upset about that because they associated mistletoe and the white berries with getting married. So the bishops allowed them to put the mistletoe on the door to the cathedral. They put it on the door. They didn't allow it inside. And when people were married, and at the end of the wedding, and when Santa does weddings, which I do, at the end of the wedding, I'll say, you may now kiss the bride. Well, the bride and groom would kiss under the mistletoe. But see, there was no more mistletoe up there at the end. None at all. It was hanging on the door. So weddings changed. And when they said their vows, before the bishop or priest or Santa would say, you may kiss the bride, the bridal party, starting with the bride and groom, would come back down the aisle out to the doors, the big doors, which hang open with mistletoe, stand in the doors, and people would stand both inside the church looking at the couple in the doorway, but there would also be people in town, and the people in town would be out there watching this couple finally kiss under the mistletoe. So mistletoe has been associated with healing and with kissing underneath it. And that's why you hang it on a doorway and you kiss under it. You didn't know that, did you? There is one other reason why mistletoe is associated with weddings and with marriage and with kissing. And I'll just say that mistletoe has white berries, and where the red berries are associated with menses, the white berries are associated with males and fertility. Yes, and that was very big, but I'm not going to go too far into that. I wanted to tell you about something kind of weird. I'm going to kind of go forward a little bit. Here we go. Long before Christmas was Christmas, remember, it was called Saturnalia. It was the winter festival. It was not called Christmas before 2,000 years ago, before the story of Jesus in the Bible. And people, besides having a Christmas tree, a log in the fire also represented winter when you needed the heat. So it was only in winter that people would burn wood in their fireplaces. Well, those logs became very, very important symbols. So as we got into close to the winter solstice, December 21st, people actually brought logs in and put candles in them and put, in this case, you can see they put acorns, I believe, which were used to make flour and paste. And these are cranberries, also red during winter. And they would decorate the log and light the candles and put it out on their mantle of their fireplace or on their table where they ate dinner. And the log, it was called a Yule log. And I'm not going to go yet into where Yule came from, but the log represented celebrating winter, that we were going to have heat and we would burn the wood, the logs in our fireplace. Well, we went along with Yule logs for a long time, and a lot of people still have Yule logs. In fact, they're made often out of bread and things like that, and you'll see Yule logs everywhere. But something rather weird happened for a little while. And this was in, I believe it was in Germany and in Denmark and in Holland. The Yule log, which in ancient times was a log in a little cabin that only had a fireplace. Later on, you can see, if you look at this picture, you'll see this girl. She's eating what looks like some candy of some kind. And behind her is a bicycle, and over here are some Snickers bars and other things. You can see this is modern times. But families, especially dads, would get an old log and they would carve the inside out, which was often empty, And they would put it on their kitchen table or their mantelpiece, but they would also, in the carved out places, they would put candy. They would fill the log, this little log, with candy, and they would put it on the table, or they would, usually the table or the mantle, and they would kind of put the log up a little bit as though it were like an animal. They would, you see little sticks right here coming out, which might be popsicle sticks, but regular sticks were often used. And you'll see pictures of these logs with legs on them and even antlers sometimes. And those are not just Yule logs, but they were made so that you could hit the Yule log, you could hit it, and candy would fall out of it, right? Because it was stuffed with candy. So kids would hit the Yule log either on December 21st or maybe days before. And each time they hit it, candy would come out and they would get candy. Well, if you put 4 legs on a log and maybe some antlers, it looks like an animal. And when the candy falls out, it looks a little like the log is pooping. And they called these logs poop logs. I'm serious, they did, poop logs, that's what they were called. It was a strange little part of the Yule log thing. We no longer do this, although it is practiced sometimes in the Netherlands and Germany as a form of a very ancient way of celebrating December 21st, the winter solstice. So the Yule log became the poop log. And we have holly berries and we have mistletoe. Oh my goodness, all these things. In fact, we have apples too that come in. So you didn't know all this stuff was going on, did you? Well, here's Odin, and Odin crossing the sky, and Sleipnir, who has 8 legs. Later that became sleigh, and it became reindeer, 8 reindeer. I want to tell you one other little thing about Christmas that I'm sure you don't know. During World War II, millions of men and not a lot of women, but men and women were overseas in various places in the Pacific, Japan, and in Europe. And they were away for Christmas because of the war. And, you know, families still wanted their children, their brothers, sisters, their fathers, mothers, their son and daughters to get and receive a present for Christmas. And the military tried to make sure that any present sent to a soldier overseas, anywhere, would get the present by Christmas. It was kind of a guarantee. But they said that you have to mail your package by a certain date. So they had time to get it to the soldiers. And the day that they told people during World War II that they had to have their packages into the post office was the day after Thanksgiving. Well, what is the day after Thanksgiving today? We call it Black Friday, but it's a big shopping day. And it's a big shopping day for a very important reason, because people would go out after their Thanksgiving dinner and get up in the morning, and they would go out to stores and they would get the gifts for their soldiers who were overseas. They would bring them home or to the post office, wrap them, package them, and then put postage on them and mail them to the soldiers. So Black Friday, which is, we think of just being a shopping day where Amazon has cheap stuff and Best Buy. Well, the fact is that Black Friday really comes from families wanting to send their soldiers Christmas presents. And in this picture here, you'll see, here's a tiny little Christmas tree, and here's a present, and in it is probably some cookies and maybe some chocolate or some food or a pen knife or something. But these are soldiers opening their present that came in time for Christmas. So doesn't that make the day after Christmas seem even more important? I hope that it does. So we have the Yule log and the poop log and Odin and with the sun, and we have Sleipnir with his 8 things. Now, during, in Roman times, the 21st of December was really an important day because that was when the sun was in the sky the least, and it was the darkest time. And it was still a time when they worshipped Saturnalia, which became a festival, and people would eat and became very a big party, and kind of the Romans went a little overboard from this picture, eating and whatever going on. But Saturnalia was a big feast for the world, December 21st, all over the world. And the Romans had a funny practice for the 21st, and it usually happened the night before. Romans, especially special singers and performers, would form little troops that would go out into where people lived and tell stories and put on plays and sing for them. Well, they were called mummers. This is a picture of a mummers festival now today, and all these people are all dressed and, all kinds of costumes and things, because in Roman times, the mummers who went out, they performed. So they didn't just sing, they did plays and juggling and did all kinds of things. Those were the mummers. But you realize that we still on Christmas Eve have people go out, and they are mummers, but we don't call them that too much anymore. In some countries of the world, they're called mummers, but here in America, we call them Christmas carolers. But people get dressed up and they go out into where people live, and they go door to door and sing. Well, this comes from Roman times. I mean, we've been doing this for thousands of years. So if you go out and you go Christmas caroling, guess what? You're practicing something from thousands and thousands of years ago. You're a mummer. I think I want to reiterate something important, bringing religion into Christmas, because the reason for bringing a tree in wasn't just to celebrate life and celebrate the return of life in the spring, in the middle of winter. But there was also a festival and a feast day around the 21st of December. It was called the Feast of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve, in the Bible, of course, started mankind and lived in the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve, of course, Eve ate the apple from the apple tree. But one of the reasons that people brought trees into their house was because it was the Feast of Adam and Eve. So religion was a part of, well, you know what? Even worshiping Saturnalia and Odin, that was a religion too. But slowly Christianity became bigger than the worship of Odin and other gods and Saturnalia and everything. So the Bible and Jesus all became part of Christmas. Something important to know, because I think people don't know this. When the Pilgrims came to America, Christmas was considered an occult or a satanic ritual. Became a satanic connection, because it was considered a connection with Odin, and I'm going to tell you about Grumpus in just a moment. But it was associated with something that wasn't the Bible, and so the Pilgrims outlawed Christmas. They often went and attacked people who celebrated Christmas. They went to the house and they injured them and hurt them. It was against the law to practice Christmas and celebrate Christmas when the Pilgrims came to America. And in fact, in the United States, Christmas wasn't considered anything important in our country. Our Congress met on Christmas Day well into the 30s. It wasn't a national holiday at all. And a lot of the religions, the Christian religions, sort of believed that people who celebrated Christmas, again, were celebrating something that was not okay. So it took a long time for Christmas to really become part of our culture. My mouth is really dry. Charles Dickinson wrote A Christmas Carol and celebrated Scrooge, who didn't like Christmas. And this was a story about Scrooge sort of being visited by ghosts and learning that his life was important and that he was important to everybody else. And eventually he brought food to the family of somebody who worked, Bob Cratchit, and to his son who was limp. But I think there's something that you may not know about the Christmas Carol and Scrooge, because he seems like a really nasty person. Oh, he hates Christmas. and he just loves money. And that's what we picture Scrooge as. But that's not true. Because in England at that time, people did not like Christmas. They did not believe in Christmas. Christmas was not okay. Yes, that's right. Charles Dickens wrote this story about a person who hated Christmas because most people were like Scrooge. They didn't like Christmas. And it was him with his story who changed our picture of Christmas by showing Scrooge beginning to understand Christmas in a different way and to see that how he treated people and what he did in his life was important to people. So this was, Christmas changed when the story came out. And we read it now and we think, oh, Scrooge, he's a big jerk. But that's not actually the case. So, and of course we have Santa and the 8 reindeer. I want to talk a little bit about the story of Jesus's birth and how it got connected with Christmas. First of all, there were many gods, different kinds of people that were worshipped during the ancient ages and even into just a few thousand years ago. And one of them was a god called Yelnor. And Yelnor did something not okay with the other gods. So Yelnor, who was kind of a young man, Yelnor, because he did something wrong, he was placed on a tree and he was nailed to that tree. And while he was nailed to that tree, because he was bad and he was still alive, he was whipped and stabbed. And water came out of him, out of his wounds. And he died. And he was part of the celebration of Saturnalia and the winter solstice because he died, and it's sort of, here's a god who is in the world who goes away like the sun does in its dark time, and it's sad almost. And people associated that with Yelnor. And Yelnor in the story, we're going back a long, long time. Yelnor came back to life 3 days later. That's right. Yelnor came back to life and brought the sun with him and light. There are a lot of other stories about Yelnor, but Yelnor is where Yule comes from. Yule comes from the god Yelnor, who was on a tree, who was crucified, and who came back to life 3 days later. Know anybody else who was crucified on a tree, on wood, who was stabbed, and who came back to life 3 days later? Where did the story of Jesus come from? One other thing that I want to kind of connect you to is this night sky. Let's go back. We see the star where the Magi followed the star to find Jesus. The fact is that the Magi, Bethlehem and where the kings came from, was only, I think, something like 11 miles away. I mean, they would not need a star to find Bethlehem and to find the birth of Jesus. But the story goes that there was a star in the sky, and that's been a big part of our Christmas ever since the telling of the story. But do you know that about every 800 years, Saturn and Jupiter come together in the sky, and they almost look like one, and they become larger? Well, this December 21st, for the first time in 800 years, this year, Jupiter and Saturn are going to come together in the night sky. And we believe that the story of the night of the star, Christmas star, comes from this Jupiter and Saturn coming together as a star. And in the story, it lights the way for the kings to come and to bring Jesus gifts. And you see how connected we are. And the story of this star in the night goes back 2,400 years, 3,200 years. So the star has been part of our story for so long. So look up in the night sky as we get closer to Christmas. When you see a real bright star like this, you're going to see something that is only seen every 800 years. We put out presents and carrots for the reindeer and for mostly for the reindeer right now, but we also leave things out for Santa. Well, all of Santa, all of the stories of Santa, Sinterklaas, St. Nicholas, they all contain parts of St. Nicholas or Sinterklaas coming in the night into a house, seeing the boots and the socks drying over the fireplace and the boots on the floor. And people would leave candy or carrots in the boots for Sinterklaas, because carrots were vegetables, food, and they left sugar as a treat for Sinterklaas, for St. Nicholas. And so St. Nicholas started by leaving coins. Remember the three women? And later on, it was Sinterklaas who would come and get the carrots and the sugar and the candy and give them to not the reindeer, but for themselves, for himself. Well, in the Netherlands, the story is that St. Nicholas went around with a very creepy looking dude called Grumpus, Grumpus, Grumpus. And Grumpus was not a nice dude. He was kind of a monster. And he would go with the bishop. And if the children were good and treated the bishop with respect and took care of their chores and things, Sinterklaas would leave money or maybe candy or some food or cookies for them. But the story is that Grumpus, if the child was bad, Grumpus would spank him or whip him. And if the child was bad enough, Grumpus, who later became Krampus, Grumpus would put the child in a black bag and take the child out into the woods and eat him. So parents told their children, if you aren't good, Grumpus is going to take you. And I'll tell you what, today we don't threaten our children with a creature that's going to come and eat them. But we do say, if you're not good, you won't get any gifts from Sinterklaas. So Grumpus is out there, and in some places, like in the Netherlands, people dress up as Grumpus and Krampus, and they have horns, and they're horrible looking, and they go around in town, and it's legal for them to scare kids and people. And they walk around town, and they come up behind little children, and they go, "Ah!" and they scare them to death. And it's legal that one night for Krampus or Grumpus to scare the children. And a lot of times people come out and they just watch because it was very crazy. Anyways, I do want to say to you children, if you leave out carrots for the reindeer, do not leave the little carrots out, because reindeer bite, and we want the carrots to be long like this, and we want them to have the green so Santa can hold them and the reindeer can eat and Santa doesn't get bit. Okay? Let's see, I think that this is like a picture of sugar that was left in the shoes. What I want you to come away with is Christmas goes back a long time, and everything we do in Christmas is connected to something ancient, not just to Jesus's birth in Bethlehem, but it goes back thousands and thousands of years to when there was no electricity and no lights. People lived in the woods, and during the winter they had no food because the sun would go away, and they would pray and make feasts to the sun gods to bring light. And today, yes, we go get presents, which is celebrating Sinterklaas bringing things. Yes, we decorate trees, which is actually us celebrating winter solstice and that the light will come back. And St. Nicholas, the patron saint of children and the patron saint of unwed mothers, comes from stories that go back so long. And so I guess the reason that I wanted to be sure and talk to you about all this was that Christmas isn't about just one thing. Christmas is a celebration of humanity, about how we live in the world, and the gods that take care of us, whether that God is Odin or it's Jesus. Those things are important for us to honor. And everyone has different things that they believe. Some go way back and some are fairly recent. And it's important for us all to, I think, not just respect that, for us to celebrate that. So we sing carols, and when Santa does Silverton Sings, which will be happening in just right when this is ending at silvertonsings.com, we sing carols because the Romans did. The mummers went out and celebrated. So if you wanted to get a little group and go caroling door to door, you could also put on a play, or you could do juggling, or you could tell stories, because that's what Christmas was in Roman time. I hope that all of the little pieces of Christmas bring even more joy and become more important to you. When you light the lights on the Christmas tree, thousands of years ago, they didn't have electricity or glass or wires. They put candles on their tree to represent the light of the sun coming back. And they put, of course, the apples and the mistletoe, and they put berries. So today, even when you see here where I have a fireplace and I have the wreath and I have the Christmas tree behind me, when you see those things, I want you to know there's more than just getting presents. It's a celebration of life and of birth and of all that we get from the earth, our food, and the beauty of it. And it's an important time for us to love each other, to remember how we have sometimes to send to people overseas who are helping other people or defending them. Unwed mothers, children who are not treated well by their parents or other adults, who it's our job to help take care of people. So I want to welcome you to kind of a new Christmas, because I think it's going to look different to you. I hope. And I thank you so much for being here and for sharing Christmas with me. And I am in Silverton right now, and I'd love for you to come and visit with me Saturday and Sunday afternoon. I'm at Finds It Shine right downtown. The music is coming from the theater, the Palace Theater. And I'm really glad that I get to come every once in a while and spend time in Silverton to be with you guys. I look forward to see you, and I thank you so much. Merry Christmas and peace to you all.